We're now live, aren't we, Lisa?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Okay. Right. Could I ask everybody to, Bill, could you mute yourself? Thank you. Is everybody muted? Yes. Okay. Good evening. My name is Ian Fradgley. I'm chair of the Town Council Planning Consultative Committee, and I welcome you to this meeting. Some housekeeping and information before we start. Item 5 on the agenda allows the public to address the meeting during public participation on non-agenda items. Thereafter, only persons registered to speak on specific applications will be permitted to do so when invited. This meeting is being recorded by the council and being broadcast to the press and public. I have to say, councillors, there's no applications being deferred from additional chairman's actions. So without much ado, could I remind you that we are going to be continuing to use the mute and demute, etc., and using raising hands and yes and no buttons. So I'll now declare this meeting open. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Do I have any apologies for absence?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Lee, and I'm just admitting Councillor Cleave now.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Councillor Cleave. Item 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest on items on the agenda, including contact with or communication from applicants, objectors, supporters or agents, pecuniary or non-pecuniary. Do I have any declarations? No, thank you. Item 3, to receive written requests for dispensation. There are none. Item 4, to grant any requests. There are none. Item 5, public participation. We have no members of the public who are here to address us. So I'll go straight on to item 6, pre-planning applications. And the first item I've got on the list is Cox's Yard. So it's over to you, Mr. Murphy. Would you, where's he gone? I've lost him. Can you hear me, Mr. Murphy?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can. Yes. Yes.
Okay. You'll have 10 minutes to do your presentation.
Yes.
You will get a 30-second warning before the end, and then if you'd like to stay where you are, so to speak, if the councillors wish to ask you any questions, then I'll invite them to do so.
Right.
Okay, Mr. Murphy, would you like to signal that you want to start?
Yes, I shall start. I believe that Neil's in the background operating some plans.
That's right, yes.
Yes, good. Hello, Neil. Well, yes, my name is Andy Murphy. I'm from Standscape Planning, planning consultancy based in Stratford. I represent the brewery, Wells & Co. Now, Cox's Yard, I'm sure most of you know of Cox's Yard. It's owned by Stratford-upon-Avon District Council, and they have leased the land and buildings to Cox's Yard, to Wells & Co. for 125 years. So it's a very long-term lease. The problem that the brewery is facing is the unviability of the site. Historically, it's been a loss-making operation in recent years. It makes money in the summer when the tourists are there, but in the rest of the year, it's a loss-making operation. So there is a severe viability problem, and this was before the pandemic, and it's obviously even worse at the moment. So the brewery, because of their long-term lease commitments, have been looking at alternative uses of the land and buildings. And the advice they've received, and it's advice that I agree with, that a viable use is to change the use of part of the site to hotel. I mean, specifically part of the site being the large timber warehouse buildings, changing its use to something like a 12-bedroom hotel. Now, going back in time, the yard was a long-standing commercial timber yard, and in 1996 it changed its use to retail, assembly and leisure. And I think some of the uses have changed over the years, but what we have at the moment is a site that's basically in 5 parts. And if Neil's got the plan showing the 5 zones, A, B, C, D, E, that's the one. So part A is the main pub. It's a 2-storey building. B is the single-storey cafe. C and D are the large timber warehouses. Now on the ground floor, there are some kitchen uses associated with the cafe, but the first and second floor are operated by a theatre group known as Tread the Boards. I'll come back to the theatre at the end of my presentation. Now, building E is Tramway House, which is a 2-storey dwelling house, and that's operated by, lived in by a manager of the site. Now, in terms of key constraints, there are many constraints on the site. Listed buildings, the main historic building C, which is the old timber warehouse, that's a listed building. Tramway House is a grade 2 listed building. And of course, the whole site itself is a listed building fundamentally. The Clopton Bridge is a scheduled monument. And flooding, the site is prone to flooding. There are some protective barriers that are erected from time to time adjacent to the Avon. I think some of you may have seen those in operation, those flood prevention barriers. Parking is limited. There's only space for about 8 cars to park on the site. So if the site were to be developed with a hotel, we would expect that future residents would perhaps drive onto site for dropping off and picking up services and perhaps a taxi. But for the most part, residents would be expected to park in one of the nearby public car parks. Now, as for the proposal itself, we have drawn some draft floor plans. I mean, if Neil could put up maybe one of them, the first floor plan. Thanks. One of the constraints on the building is light. There's not a lot of natural light in the building, but hotels don't need a lot of natural light. I mean, I've stayed in hotel rooms with no light at all in the bedrooms. So the proposal is that we would retain the existing openings. And as you know, the eastern side of the building facing the Bancroft Gardens, that's a very blank timbered elevation. So we're not proposing to put any windows on that side of the building. There is more light facing into the courtyard and also at the end. So the ambition is to retain the existing openings and not have any new openings at all. Now, I have a meeting booked with the Conservation Officer of the Council in a couple of weeks' time. So we're going to be walking through the site and assessing these floor plans in more detail. So I'm not going to go into any detail really now about the layout of the site, of the floor plan. In broad terms, we're proposing to remove the modern partitions that are there and insert new partitions to subdivide the floors into bedrooms. And so, as I said, it's a work in progress, those floor plans. The ambition is to submit a planning and listed building consent application, hopefully in September. We're still working on the flood risk assessment at the moment. And the plans itself still have not been completed yet. So as I said, the rest of the site would remain unchanged. So the pub will remain as a pub, and the cafe would remain as the cafe. The manager's operation, manager's house and tramway house would remain the same. And we see there being a mutually supportive relationship between the hotel and the other uses, because the hotel guests may use the pub and the cafe. Users of the pub and the cafe may want to stay the night at the hotel. So we see it being actually a supportive relationship between the other users on the site to have a hotel in part of the site. Now, I'm going to finish off with the future of the theatre, because I'm mindful of the policy in the neighbourhood plan, CLW1, about protecting and enhancing existing community facilities. This proposal would mean the loss of theatre uses in the first and second floor. Now, the future of the theatre group is somewhat fluid at the moment. The theatre group is known as Tread the Boards. They are fairly footloose they are touring at the moment, Wind in the Willows. They're touring across a variety of locations in Warwickshire, and I think only 2 of the nights are actually in Cox's Yard anyway. So it is a rather footloose theatre group. And even before the pandemic, there was some discussion about them vacating the premises altogether. Now, I'm told that the brewery have spoken to one of the operators of the theatre group, and just to let them know that I was giving this presentation, because up until now, this proposal has not been put out into the public domain. So there is clearly a discussion to be had in more detail between the brewery and Tread the Boards, and we don't really know what their long-term prospects are for staying at Cox's Yard. It is conceivable that a theatre group could still operate from the pub, for example, if it's just to be the odd night here and there when the show is to be held. I mean, the first floor of the pub could be used occasionally. But again, it's something that clearly we are quite mindful of, is about the long-term use of the building as a theatre. But of course, the pub needs to look at viability issues and needs to find long-term viable use of the site. And hotel accommodation, we think, is a good long-term viable use of the main workshop, well, former warehouse buildings, buildings C and D. So I'm going to leave my presentation there and open myself up to questions if you have any.
Right, would you like to raise your blue hands? Councillor Jenny Fradgley. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Dealing with the, is that just a single, I can't remember actually, I've been inside there lots of times, but is that just a single wooden building? Would you actually construct a whole hotel building on the inside and that will be a skin? Or is there a structural already there?
The structure is already there, so it's already in 3 floors, ground, first and second floor. Yeah. And the old, as it were, the oldest part of the site is building C. You know, that's the main original timber warehouse. I think the building D was built, I think, in the 1930s. It's clearly later. But they've got their own independent staircases. There's already a lift as well. There's a disabled access lift in there. And if you were to walk around, you would see lots of modern partitions. I think must have been inserted in the 1990s. So I think in the old days it was just a big open shed, but it has been heavily subdivided since then. And it's not we don't need to put a building in a building. Effectively, the building is already, the floors are there. I don't think the floors need changing, but I think some of the modern partitions will need to come out.
Because it would just be interesting. I mean, as you're actually going around with the conservation officer, will the internal structures be part of the conservation conversation? Or
absolutely, yes. I mean, fundamentally, it's really about the internal changes, because I don't really see there being any external changes. Conservation officers are notoriously, they don't like external changes. So I think our default position is not to have external changes. I probably will have a conversation about roof lights, maybe in building D, if there's a need, because the top floor, if you've ever been into the theatre, the very top floor where the main theatre is very dark. It's almost completely dark, and there are some high level windows which are currently got blankets over. But if you look at it from the outside, you will see a band of high level windows that will need to open up. But it must be said that the top floor is rather dark, and we have to deal with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dowling.
Thank you. I don't know if you, well, you go back as far as I do, obviously you don't, but I don't know if you know that the only reason that Cox's Yard got permission in the first place was that they retained the timber warehouse as part of the site. So I'll just give you that bit of information.
Okay. Oh, thank you, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Darling. Councillor Cleeve.
Thank you. Did you say, sorry, I know you said this has just become public now. Did you say that you've spoken to the theatre group, or you're in the process of doing that?
The manager of Wells and Co told me that he would be speaking to the operator of the theatre group before today, to let them know that today I will be giving this presentation. I mean, clearly, I mean, it's now out in the public domain now, but I'm told that conversation has already taken place. I don't have any more details for you because I wasn't privy to it.
Okay.
But I think that after this meeting, and again after my meeting with the conservation officer, there need to be more discussions held with the theatre group, because clearly they need to have a future, and that needs to be discussed with them.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously an asset there, so it is something that obviously we'd like to still see some kind of theatre there. And one other question, if you don't mind, through you, Chair. Have you looked at the viability of a hotel? Are you aware of all the other hotel applications that are in town? And have you looked?
Yes, I am. We've taken advice from Peter Clark and Co. You see, about marketing and viability issues. Basically, the current state of affairs, the site is unviable. So I've made that perfectly plain that they cannot go on as it is at the moment. It's just losing too much money. So Peter Clark and Co. have been through all the options: office use, retail, all the community uses, everything you can think of that might generate an income. And the consensus is that some kind of hotel accommodation or visitor accommodation is the only way forward. And yes, there are lots of hotel applications, but Stratford is a very vibrant tourist town. The site itself is really wonderful for tourists, because they're right in the heart of the action there, and it's a rather quirky site. So yes, we would be in competition with others, but because it's a 12-bedder, it's actually a very small hotel. It's a small hotel, and the advice we're getting is it ought to be, the biggest cost is the conversion costs, which I think will cost a lot. I mean, maybe £1 million or whatever, just to do the conversion itself. But after that, it ought to be a viable use, so we're told.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fraggi, would you like to lower your blue hand and mute yourself?
Sorry, I thought I had.
No. Well, it gets a bit confusing when you don't do it.
Yes.
Councillor Curtis.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, just a couple of questions, if I may. I mean, interesting plans. I was wondering, really, you mentioned that the possible hotel would make some of the other catering facilities on the site more viable. So I was wondering what catering within the hotel there would be, and also what sort of market you're aiming for. I mean, I would have thought if it's 12 bedrooms, it's more likely to be boutique, perhaps very exclusive upmarket, or are you aiming for budget? So some idea of the sort of market that you're pitching to would be helpful.
So dealing with the first part first, the catering would take place outside of building C and D. So because there are kitchens in the pub, building A. I mean, there are very big kitchens there, I have to say. And there's obviously some smaller catering uses in building B, which is where the cafe is. So the ambition is that the hotel residents would be taking their evening meals in the pub, where the kitchens are, and for breakfasts they would probably take it in the pub. So we think, I think the breakfast and the evening meals would be in the pub. The cafe probably not suited for hotel guests, but we'll see how it goes. But basically, no kitchens at all in building C and D. In terms of the low, middle, and high level of marketing for the hotel, it's probably sort of middle to high. I mean, the rooms aren't going to be very big, and I mean, if the floor plan appears again, just have a look at that. I mean, they're not big rooms, but there's actually a little bit of variety in there. One of the rooms at the end is there we go. You look at bedroom 5, for example. That's quite a big room, and it's got a nice view. So bedroom 5 is going to be upmarket. The other bedrooms, medium, I would have thought. Yeah. So I think that's the kind of range we're looking at.
So sort of boutique rather than budget.
Boutique, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, I haven't got anybody else who wishes to ask a question. Is that true? Does anybody want to say anything? Mr. Mayor?
No, Jill's asked Michael. My big concern is the viability of a hotel on the site when we've got so much hotel space already planned in town. But it's one of those that we have to live with, I think. So,
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Murphy. Thank you for your presentation. We'll look forward to seeing you in a few weeks' time.
Okay, I hope so too.
With a real live thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right, the next item on pre-planning is a well-known site amongst Stratfordians, number 1 Arden Street / 2 Greenhill Street. I'd like to, unfortunately, Mr. Spicer is, I'm not quite sure where he is, but he couldn't make it this evening. I think he's lost his internet access. So Elliot Gould is going to do the presentation instead of Mr. Spicer. You know the form, Mr. Goodall. You've been and done this before. You get 10 minutes, 30 seconds before the end, you get a warning, so to speak. And tell us when you want to start.
So, here you go, okay. I'll start now.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. As you are probably well aware, this is the site of 1 Arden Street.
Sorry, Mr. Goodall, could you raise your voice a bit?
Yeah, sorry. So it's the site of 1 Arden Street, and is an application to supersede the previous approval that we sought and had approved in 2017. The reference number 16/01185, if you want to have a look at that. The previous scheme was for 9 open market apartments, a mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms with some office space on the ground floor. And subsequent to the approval being granted, we have been looking at various options for extending the scheme into number 2 Greenhill Street, which the client also purchased around a similar time. The revised scheme that's before you now is effectively a similar scheme to that, although it's slightly larger on Greenhill Street. It maintains a similar rhythm essentially along Arden Street, but the increase in the width on Greenhill Street allows us to assimilate the rhythm of Arden Street along both elevations. The revised scheme is for is a build to rent scheme rather than open market. Again, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, but we have been able to increase the density of apartments on the site as a result of us being able to extend into the Greenhill Street property as well. I've said that, as I've discussed, we've been able to rationalise the elevations to make the elevation along Greenhill Street far more consistent with that of Arden Street, and so it actually harmonises better on both sides. The revised development also introduces a living green wall, which you can see where the cursor is just hovering now. This extends over the top floor on all 4 sides, and then down what we would class as the rear elevation of the top floor into the penultimate floor, and then also extends on the east elevation, which is the one that abuts the Greenhill Street terraces. This also then extends down into a large atrium, which the cursor is currently hovering over at the moment. Not only does this soften the elevation from that side, and there's actually a slide later on which shows what the visual reference or interpretation of that would be. It's down towards the end of the slide. We'll get to that in a minute. But also it provides an improved biodiversity of what the site currently has and was it previously as well. So even when it was the Green Dragon, this was quite an unvegetated site. There wasn't really much going for it in terms of greenery. It also improves air living quality by enabling air particulates around the building to be absorbed, and also ensures that CO2 is absorbed throughout its lifetime whilst it's in place. We've also been able to retain the electric pool cars service, which we had included in the previous application, and have improved the activity on the street frontage by a change to the use on the ground floor. So rather than office space we're now proposing a residents-only gym on one portion, but also an all-inclusive, I suppose you could say, juice bar or healthy cafe type thing, which will have like a kiosk access on Greenhill Street. So there's a bit of activity along there as well. We are, I don't know if you want to cycle through the slides slightly. So this slide itself is, in fact, if you go up one, so this shows the east elevation, the top elevation there. We have consolidated what was a fairly compromised elevation previously as a result of the residential property that was adjacent to us. But if you then move down one, the reality is that you won't actually see quite so much of the black brick, because there's an existing boundary wall there, and the property itself adjacent to it are all commercial. So there's no issues in terms of overlooking of amenities, and hopefully we've been able to impress all of the more interesting elements of the scheme to the two streets that face Greenhill Street and Arden Street, which are the kind of prominent elevations. If we could then scroll down another couple, this is the ground floor plan. So as you can see, the previous scheme was approximately the same width as the gym and the corridor. We've then extended into what was number 1 Greenhill Street, and that has enabled us to densify the site on the upper levels. So we've been able to add a few extra apartments. Now, all apartments are within space standards as set out by the government. They're all fairly good sizes for middle of town kind of properties. As I said earlier, they're all is a buy to let rather than open market. And as an advantage over the previous scheme, which included no affordable provision at all and didn't need to either, there's a legitimate percentage allowed for affordable properties in this one by reduced rent. So there's a benefit in that sense as well. If you want to scroll down another one, there's provision for breakout space on the kind of penultimate floor. So there'll be some breakout terraces. Again, we've tested the separation distances from nearby apartments and things on, say, the opposite side of Greenhill Street. There's no issues in terms of overlooking on these senses, and as a result of the absorption of the residential dwelling next door to us, we've mitigated overlooking of amenities in that sense as well. So there's no issues in that regard. If we can now scroll down to the last 2 slides. This is a revised slide of the street scene from Ulster Road. As you can see, the actual fenestration and changes to the elevation are fairly minimal. The scheme is pretty much the same as it was approved in 2017. If we could then scroll down to the last, this is the view from Greenhill Street. So previously we had quite a stark abutment here. This was clad in copper. We have now introduced a living green wall to try and soften this area. And by virtue of the fact that we've been able to extend into the next apartment, we've been able to progressively reduce the terracing, so that rather than being quite a significant junction between that and the terraces of Greenhill Street, it's a bit more tapered down. I think that's all I've got to say so far. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Right, thank you. Could you click it off, Neil? Right, if you'd like to raise your hands, and I'll start with the Mayor. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask for, I mean, on the basis that there was a previous planning application that was approved 3 years ago, could you give us some history as to why that particular application has never progressed, and what's the thinking behind changing the original design to this new design?
Yeah, well, our original client, the original applicant, made that application originally on the basis of then selling the site, and has tried to ever since, but there's never really been a viable sale on the table. His business isn't really in market dwellings, it's more in the buy-to-let scheme. So as a kind of progression from the kind of failings to sell the site, I think early this year and in between the start and finish of lockdown, I think he's decided that actually it would be more in his interest to retain the structure on the site, or retain the site, sorry, and try and develop it as a PRS scheme instead. Having already purchased number 1 Greenhill Street, it seemed like an obvious step to try and consolidate the two, particularly as this is an area of town that is regarded as needing development. It seemed like a kind of sensible step to try and incorporate that in. And by moving to a PRS scheme, we were able to actually implement more affordable dwellings, really, by increasing the number and density on the site. So that's another reason as well.
Thank you. Could I just, is it possible to give some indication of the change of the size and the scope of the dwelling compared to the original plan? It's going to be obviously slightly bigger because you're taking over to Greenhill Street.
We're taking over to number 2, yeah. So essentially, what the most obvious change, really, if you was to look from Arden Street, the fenestration is almost the same. Moving round onto Greenhill Street, effectively the site has elongated, essentially. But what that's allowed us to do is to rationalise the bay width of the I think it's 3 bays along Greenhill Street, to assimilate better with that on Arden Street. So as you come round now, each bay is the same. So it's a bit more, originally we were going for sort of like the townhouse feel, and we've been able to replicate that better on Greenhill Street now as a result of the absorption of number 2, Greenhill Street.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Cleeve.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed. How many apartments did you say were in the building?
So there's 18 overall. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how many are 1 and how many are 2, but there's a reasonable mix. The majority of them are on 1 level, i.e. 1 level apartments, but there are a couple that are duplexes, and there are a couple that are also studio as well. So we are kind of really providing a very broad range of apartment sizes to meet all needs and requirements.
Thank you. And did I see that there was some parking?
Yes, it's not as with the previous scheme. There's an obligation to enter into an agreement where the residents don't have a specific space themselves on site. I mean, they're free to pay for spaces overnight in the open air spaces, but the idea is that they would sign up to an agreed pool car system. There's 4 spaces for that. These would be electric pool cars, and they can hire them out through the management company that run the actual rental scheme.
So the spaces there are just purely for the pool cars?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleeve. Councillor Dyer.
This is probably the most congested road junction in Stratford, with traffic lights making it even worse. What will be the effect of this new development on traffic flow on that road junction?
We had for the original application that was approved in 2017, we had a highways survey undertaken, and by virtue of the fact that we were restricting the residents to effectively no parking other than the pool car system, the impact was regarded as fairly negligible, because the number of passes, I suppose you'd call them, a day from the junction onto the site would be quite minimal, considering how many vehicles would be passing the site itself. We aren't, although we are increasing the number of apartments, we're not necessarily increasing the number of spaces available. There will be 4 spaces there, and they can only be hired out by 1 person at a time. So the impact should be negligible between that scheme and this one. It should be the same.
Presumably, people will be picked up and dropped off on that corner, though, not necessarily going into the buildings.
Well, I mean, that would be a highway safety issue rather than. I mean, we can't really plan around people breaking the law, unfortunately. But what we can do is promote parking spaces elsewhere. I mean, theoretically, with the entrance being put on Greenhill Street rather than Arden Street, there's less inclination to stop at the junction and more inclination to actually go around the corner anyway, where there are spaces along the road available to pull over. So by design, hopefully we've mitigated that issue to a degree.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to mute yourself, Councillor Dyer? Thank you. Councillor Fragile?
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. This, as you very well know, is a much loved site in Stratford, and there was a lot of regret when the Green Dragon actually met its end. Just a bit concerned. You've made quite a lot of the fact that this is a buy-to-let structure, which means there will be many different possibly 18 different landlords having bought a flat to let. How is the maintenance? I mean, it's probably I'm thinking about conditions rather than planning, but I'm really concerned because it's such a particular site. The maintenance there will have to be excellent because it's prominent in the town, and it's a very large structure as well.
Hopefully I can put your mind at ease. This isn't individual lets, this would be a private rental scheme. So under one management, and the plan itself provides concierge facilities on the ground floor. So there'll be a management team or company responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of the entire site, the hire of the pool cars, and potentially any other aspects that private rental schemes can often offer as a perk.
Thank you. It wasn't clear from your presentation that that's what you meant.
Apologies. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Thank you.
Right. Does anybody else want to ask a question? No. A couple, myself, if I may, Mr. Gould. What provision are you making for cycling?
We have
parking cycles.
Parking cycles. If someone could bring up the ground floor plan again, we have actually made a significant provision for cycles. I think there's about 10 spaces within the building itself. So on the Arden Street side, as you come in into the Undercroft, there'll be an entry there for secure private cycle storage with lockable spaces.
Right, thank you. Going back to the previous conversation on buy to let, is there any control over somebody taking over one of these apartments and turning it into an Airbnb?
So just to clarify, because these are private rental scheme houses, so these would be under ownership of the client. Effectively, he will own the building, and the rentals will be to that client, so they won't own the property. So it's unusual that such a client would enter into a sublet agreement with somebody. So under those circumstances, I would say it's probably highly unlikely that anyone would ever be able to use it for an Airbnb circumstance.
Unfortunately,
legalities would allow it.
Unfortunately, it's not unusual. It's happened in my ward recently.
Really?
With wild overnight parties.
Okay.
Okay, does anybody else want to ask a question? No, that's it. Thank you very much, Mr. Gould. We look forward to seeing you in a few weeks' time.
Yes,
or
hopefully,
Mr. Spicer.
A couple of weeks, we should have something for you to get your teeth into. Hopefully, yeah.
You're submitting your planning application.
We are indeed, yeah. Hopefully within a couple of weeks or so, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Okay. just have to skim down. Item 7 on the agenda, to approve the draft open minutes of the Planning Consultative Committee meeting on the 7th of July. Do I have your agreement? If you'd like to tick the boxes, a yes box or a no box. Right, that's unanimous. Thank you. Item 8. There are, as I've previously said, there are no planning applications for us to sit in judgment of this evening. I can get to it. Item 8.2, to note the action taken by the town clerk after consultation with Councillor Dowling and myself on the 29th of July to do with Chairman's actions. And the fact that the additional Chairman's actions was the same on 3rd of August. But do I have your, the fact that you've noted the 29th of July? If you could tick your box, say you've noted. Thank you, that's unanimous. Item 8.3.A, street trading none. Item 8.3.B, licensing none. Item 8.4, notices of decision. As far as I could see, there are no specific distant differences between what we have said and what the district have done. The districts were mostly grant, and we'd gone no reps on them. Okay. Item 8.5, any other business? A, it's to note the update on the adoption of the Stratford-upon-Avon District Council's Climate Change Action and Mitigation SPD. There was a request sent out to ask you if you've got any specific questions in advance of this meeting, and to mine, I haven't seen any specific questions, so I can only assume that you're happy with it. So are you happy to note this? If you'd like to tick it. Thank you. Item 9, Chairman's verbal report. I haven't got much to say. Item 10, requests for alterations. There are none. Item 11, to register to speak at SDC planning. Tomorrow evening, I'm going to attend that to about the Timothy's Bridge Road development. On planning B on the 12th of August, the agenda came out this morning, and we've got no items on that, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens on the 19th of August when it's planning A again. One thing I might add is that the district council are attempting to change the way they conduct their planning meetings, because yes, Bill, because there have been a number of sort of 5 or 6 hour meetings of late, and there's been an awful lot of complaints that, you know, how can you make a decision after 2 hours, let alone 5 hours? So they're proposing some changes, and I think these changes are being put in place for tomorrow. So it'll probably be 4.5 hours.
But let us know, Ian.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. To appoint substitutes for the next virtual chairman's actions.
Yeah, I'm actually in Wales on the 26th of August, and I'm quite happy to do it if I've got a signal. But I won't know until I get there. So I shall send you a. I'll give you a ring and let you know. But unless if I've got a Wi-Fi signal, which is a bit dodgy in some Welsh places, as you know,
Yeah.
I'll let you know. But I should be okay. But obviously, I'll let you know well in advance of that one.
Okay. Do I have a volunteer? Councillor Taylor. Thank you.
Well done.
I'll accept your hand, Kevin.
Well, what, Chair? Why don't we just get Councillor Taylor to do it anyway? Because I'll be in Wales on holiday.
Yeah. It might be best.
Is that okay with you, Kevin? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
That's lovely.
Thank you. Well, the next meeting is scheduled for the 1st of September at 6 o'clock, and I'm going to close this meeting at 18:46. Thank you, councillors.
Well done.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Neil.
Goodbye. Good night.
Cheers.
Ian, can I have a quick, when we're no longer live, can I have a quick chat?
Oh, go on then.
Well, we're live until you you need to close it down on your screen, Ian, because I can't do that. So we're until if the meeting ends, we're still live on YouTube.
Oh, what do I have to do?
End the meeting.
Do, Joe?
Well, if you end the meeting and then maybe contact.
End the meeting, Ian.